It is a dark night in May of 1996. Thunder roars in the distance, an augur of the coming storm. A Russian pensioner, Tamara Prosvirina, awakes in the middle of that night, her slumber disturbed by a distant cry for help. She stumbles out of her bed and leaves the house, slowly walking towards the desperate cries she keeps hearing as clearly as if they were in her head. Tamara is a schizophrenic, so perhaps it is just an illusion conjured by her broken mind. Yet very soon she reaches the village cemetery. There, among the graves illuminated by the flashes of lightning, she finally finds the source of the cries. Not an apparition, but a very real, physical thing. A small creature lying on the ground. Its hairless skin is of a strange gray-brownish hue. The eyes are huge, taking up most of its face. The body is thin, almost emaciated. Its bulbous head is weirdly shaped, reminiscent of a flower with its petals closed. Tamara picks up the tiny being, swaddles it in her headscarf, and, cradling it like one would hold a baby, starts walking back home. Привет, my name is Andrei, and I am here to tell you grim, mysterious, and often pretty depressing stories from the lands of the former Soviet Union. Today's story is a little bit more out there than most. It's about aliens and star-worshipping cults, and it's very fun. Well, until it isn't. But we'll get there when we get there. It also happened in a very interesting place, among the Ural Mountains. You probably know this region of Russia, even if not by name. It is where the infamous Dyatlov Pass incident happened, which was covered in recent years by everyone and their grandma. It is where all those cool dashcam videos of a meteorite falling near the city of Chelyabinsk are from. In reference to my previous video, it is where the Russian imperial family was murdered by the communists more than 100 years ago. And I have a personal connection to the Urals. Half of my family, my relatives on my mother's side, are from there. From Yekaterinburg, Chelyabinsk, and the regions around those cities. I even lived for a couple of years with my aunt and uncle in a closed town of Ozyorsk, some 15 kilometers or 9 miles from the very place our story happened. The story itself is well known in Russia, still after all these years. We sadly don't have as many of cryptids, monsters, ghosts, and other mysterious creatures as the fellas in the United States have. But this one is definitely close. So get some snacks. You have around 18 minutes of somewhat light-hearted fun before we get into the depressing stuff. And let me tell you the tale of Alyoshenka, the Kyshtym dwarf. The year is 1996, dark times for Russia, one of many, if you know the history of my motherland. Лихие 90-е, the wild 90s we call them, and for good reason. But I'll talk about this a little bit later. It all began with the, at the time, 68-year-old Tamara Prosvirina, a troubled woman who lived in the village of Kaalinovo, named after the nearby quarry where white clay, also called kaolinite, was mined. The village is just outside Kyshtym, the small town with the population of around 40,000. We don't know a lot about Tamara, and probably there isn't much to know. She seems to have been a simple woman who lived a simple and not very pleasant life. She mostly lived alone, visited once every 2 weeks by her daughter-in-law, also named Tamara. The son of Tamara, who would be the husband of the other Tamara, Sergei, was at the time in jail for robbery. Tamara was schizophrenic, often confused and overall not in a good state of neither mind nor body. And so when she started telling the neighbors that she had a brand new baby son sent to her by God himself in answer to her prayers, They, of course, didn't take it seriously. Tamara called her son Alyoshenka, which is a diminutive version of the name Alexei. This is often used in the Russian language to show affection. For example, if you at some point meet me somewhere and you would like to show your affection towards me for, say, making videos you enjoy watching, you would call me Andryushenka, which would be incredibly creepy and inappropriate coming from a stranger. So, don't do that. These diminutive forms of names are mostly used by loved ones to call each other. According to Tamara, she would cradle her son and feed him cottage cheese bars, condensed milk and hard candies. Basically a ton of sugar, which, as we know from the respected documentary Men in Black, is a desirable diet for any extraterrestrial being.
Give me sugar. In water.
The creature would consume the provided sugary biomass with its small round mouth, which didn't have a lower jaw, just the upper. Its tongue, according to those few who allegedly saw it alive, was like a little red shovel top, whatever that means. His huge eyes had cat-like irises, and those who looked into them said that they weren't glazed over, but belied a consciousness hidden inside. The anatomical anomalies didn't end there. Alyoshenka didn't have ears, his belly button was nowhere to be found, and what is most peculiar, he had no reproductive organs nor any waste excretion body parts. So he was physically unable to poop or pee. However terrifying to any man or woman the "I have no butt and I must poop" situation would seem, the being produced a weird gel-like substance all over its body after feeding. So perhaps his alien biology allowed him to defecate through the skin. People also mentioned the smell. It was unpleasant and felt more chemical than organic. One person even compared it to the smell of epoxy resin. Faintly sweet but sharp and nauseating. There are two slightly different stories that Tamara provided when questioned where she found Alyoshenka. The first one, that she went to get some water from the well in the nearby woods and found the creature there, among the trees. The second is the one I told you in the beginning. A mysterious telepathic call in the middle of the stormy night, urging Tamara to go to the graveyard. What is interesting, it would not be the first time she visited the graveyard. Tamara was known to go there from time to time, not for the regular grief-related reasons, but to pilfer the graves, taking real and plastic flower wreaths and even photographs from the headstones. Why? Who knows? It is somewhat difficult to discern how many people exactly have seen Alyoshenka alive. Because after the story became famous and journalists took interest, half the village suddenly remembered they were always best buds with the weird alien baby. Their descriptions of him got more and more outlandish. He suddenly was sitting or even walking, had piercing blue eyes and was covered in thick fur. Apart from Tamara Prosvirina, who found and fed it, the creature was definitely witnessed by the daughter-in-law and at least one neighbor. None of them, it seems, were impressed by the tiny humanoid and decided to not do anything about it. Like, I don't know, calling the authorities. And so Alyoshenka would live, eat sugar and produce strange whistling sounds for around 3 weeks. Until the neighbors, increasingly concerned with Tamara's babbling about her new child, called the nearby psychiatric hospital. The EMTs came to her home, decided that she was definitely in need of psychiatric assistance and took her away. Tamara tried telling them that she had a baby to take care of, but they ignored her. To be fair, her apartment was full of random trash. She was a bit of a hoarder. and when Tamara pointed at the small bundle of rags, I imagine it was difficult to make out among the piles of junk. One of the medics would later say that she did notice something small and alive, but thought it was a kitten or something, that Tamara, mentally disturbed as she was, swaddled and carried around like a baby. The daughter-in-law at the time was away, having gotten a temporary job in another town. Alyoshenka, left alone and unable to move, or really do anything at all, died of hunger soon after. Others who knew about his existence did not care enough to do anything about it. And the apartment was either left empty for many weeks, or, which is worse, I guess, became a den for local drunks. There is even talk that Alyoshenka did not slowly starve to death, but received a quicker, more merciful death. Some alcoholic, unaware of his surroundings in a vodka-fueled daze, sat on the little guy and crushed him. Whatever the case may be, at some point a man found himself in the apartment, Vladimir Nurdinov. He was there to steal stuff, knowing that the owner of the apartment was currently indisposed. Or he was there as a guest with Tamara's daughter-in-law. In any case, Vladimir discovered the rotting corpse of Alyoshenka, found it to be very interesting, and took it home. There he pondered on how to preserve the artifact of distant alien civilizations, and decided on treating it like a wobla, a type of fish that is a very popular dried snack in Russia and goes really well with beer. He removed all of the internal organs from Alyoshenka's carcass and dried it under the sun. Imagine you are an alien traveling among the stars. Your starship starts to break down and you perform an emergency landing on the closest planet. You are injured pretty severely, but full of hope, because your interstellar codex tells you that the planet has primitive but sentient life. You use your telepathic abilities to call for aid, expecting local authorities or scientists or maybe military. But what you get is an insane old woman who feeds you pure sugar and then disappears without a trace, leaving you to starve to death. And then some random guy desecrates your corpse by gutting it like a fish and hanging it out to dry like beef jerky. Jesus Christ. In August of 1996, someone stole some copper wire from the local power lines, and the police were investigating. The main suspect was our good friend, Vladimir Nurdinov. When the investigator Yevgeny Mokichev paid him a visit, Vladimir couldn't contain himself and said, "By the way, I have a mummified alien corpse. Wanna check it out?" Mokichev momentarily tensed up, thinking that instead of a petty thief he got himself a crazed lunatic, but Vladimir actually produced a small red cloth bundle, which, when unwrapped, indeed contained a tiny, desiccated humanoid body with a very strange alien-looking skull. All thoughts of the copper wire instantly forgotten, the policeman confiscated the mummy and took it to the precinct. Not sure what to do with it, he decided to consult his colleague. Enter whom I consider the main character of our story. Without him, we would just have at best some ramblings of the mentally ill and the heavily intoxicated. Vladimir Bendlin, the investigator with the Kyshtym police. Bendlin, to me, seems to have been the only normal person in this whole debacle, although he is not without his failings. He brought the corpse to the local coroner and received the conclusion that Alyoshenka wasn't a prematurely born human fetus. The creature's skeleton was fully formed. It had at least 2 teeth, and in the professional opinion of this particular coroner, the anatomical anomalies were too numerous for it to have been simply a deformed baby. Thus, lacking any official reason to start a criminal investigation, Vladimir brought the Alyoshenka case to his superiors. But the only thing he achieved was getting chewed out for even considering wasting any time on this. His bosses told him to drop this tomfoolery and go work on the other, real 25 unsolved cases he had on his desk. Not one to give up so easily, Bendlin resolved to figure out the strange case on his own. You could say he was a loose cannon, refusing to do it by the book. Vladimir was a little bit into the whole UFO phenomena, having previously seen mysterious lights in the night sky, so the weird alien baby piqued his curiosity. He borrowed a VHS camcorder from a friend, documented the mummified remains, and interviewed the witnesses, trying to establish the full chain of events. It is thanks to Vladimir we have definite proof that Alyoshenka actually existed, and even the rare footage of Tamara Prosvirina. Here she is in the psychiatric clinic, being told that Alyoshenka passed away.
А вы знаете, что он умер?
Кто умер?
Вот этот ребеночек умер, знаете?
Умер?
Умер.
Да что вы? А как это?
Ну вот вас в больницу положили, и он умер. Вот мы сейчас и приехали посмотреть. Ну, может, без пищи был. Его же никто не кормил без вас.
Да я уже здесь просилась, я говорю, у меня ребенок, опустите меня. Никакой не пускают.
By the way, Bendlin kept the mummified remains in the fridge at home, very much to the dismay of his wife. I want to make it clear that Vladimir wasn't some insane UFO nut. From all of the interviews with him I watched, he seems to be a pretty intelligent and chill dude. Yet the case was going nowhere and Bendlin was getting increasingly ridiculed at the precinct for taking an interest in it. You are probably thinking, well, what about a DNA test? Very astute of you, lovely viewer, except this was happening in a small Russian town in the 90s, so this kind of technology sadly wasn't readily available. Bendlin tried to figure out a way to do it by calling to the nearby city of Chelyabinsk, but the price of the test was very high and he couldn't afford it on his tiny police salary. Then, one day, he saw an ad in a newspaper, urging people with any information about anything extraterrestrial to call the number. And he did. People who answered were calling themselves the Star Academy of UFO Contact by the method of Zolotov. Zolotov being the last name of the founder, Boris Zolotov. A very curious character I will probably look into further in the future. But for now, all you need to know is that he was a cult leader. His cult had everything you are likely imagining right now. Isolation of the members from their families, siphoning money from them, weird sex stuff, the whole kit and caboodle. Except instead of some perversion of Christianity or some esoteric Eastern gobbledygook, these people were really into aliens and stuff. Bendlin, bless his soul, even recorded his phone call with them.
Объект запрошен целью навигационно-энергетического контакта. Выход затруднен в связи с навигационно-световым временем. Световой режим будет препятствовать контакту. Контакт возможен в энергетических связках.
Yeah, but still, the cultists came in a new BMW, no less. A very impressive car for the Russian backwater at the time. And Vladimir, sadly, wooed by their opulence and having nowhere else to turn, gave them the body of Alyoshenka and the copies of all of the info he gathered so far. The Star Academy people promised to study the alien remains and get back to him with the results, which, surprise, they didn't. And so Alyoshenka disappeared, never to be seen again. A couple of years later, the Japanese from the Asahi TV station took interest in the case and came to Kyshtym. Just before they arrived, the main witness, Tamara Prosvirina, passed away. Not peacefully in her bed though. She was recently finally released from the psychiatric clinic and at 2 a.m. woke up in her bed, left her home in nothing but a nightgown and started walking, eventually ending up in the middle of the nearby highway where she was hit by a truck and died on the spot. Why did she do that? Who knows? The easiest answer being she was mentally disturbed. The Japanese offered $200,000 for the remains of Alyoshenka, a little bit less than 400,000 bucks in today's money, and an absolute fortune for anyone in Kyshtym, yet the mummified corpse was long gone. Over the years, people tried to figure out what the Zolotov cultists did to it. Getting information from those whose job is to intentionally mislead and deceive was difficult, with the cultists also naturally being wary of outsiders. Here are several answers from some of the cult members. Driving away from Kyshtym, the car suddenly stopped, a ray of light enveloped the vehicle and Alyoshenka disappeared into that light. The other story is that Zolotov took the body to Baba Vanga, Bulgarian mystic and seer, but she died before he could show her the proof of alien life. And so Zolotov buried Alyoshenka near her house. My favorite story comes from Bendlin himself. He was told by someone that the cultists decapitated poor Alyoshenka and used the head to craft a magical staff to use in their rituals. A wizard's staff topped with the head of an alien. Now that is fucking metal. If you want to keep believing that Alyoshenka indeed was a son of a distant star, this is where the video ends for you, because it's time to snap back to the grim reality and get really sad. First, let's talk about Kyshtym and the area around it. It is severely polluted by both industrial waste and radioactive fallout. Yes, you heard me correctly. Overall, Chelyabinskaya Oblast, the region around the city of Chelyabinsk, is pretty polluted, having been a heavily industrial region for many decades. Metallurgy, mining and chemical industries are prevalent in the town of Kyshtym itself. The soil and the water contain an uncomfortable amount of chemical waste and heavy metals. Around 14 kilometers from Kyshtym, there is the close town of Ozyorsk, previously called Chelyabinsk 65 and Chelyabinsk 40 before that. It was built in the late 1940s to house the engineers, scientists and workers of one of the largest Soviet and now Russian plutonium plants, Mayak, lighthouse in Russian. Mayak was built between 1945 and 1948 in total secrecy. Its goal: to create weapons-grade plutonium as soon as possible, to compete with the American nuclear program and build atomic armaments, to counteract the United States after they bombed the shit out of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. For a long time, neither Mayak nor Ozyorsk were shown on any maps, and were perhaps a mystery to the enemies of the Soviet Union in the brewing Cold War. That would change in 1957 due to a faulty gauge on one of the tanks that contained around 80 tons of liquid radioactive waste. In short, on the 29th of September 1957, the tank exploded with the force of around 70 tons of TNT, enough to lift a 160-ton slab of concrete covering the tank and send it flying. The explosion was chemical, not nuclear, thank God, but still about 20 million curie of radiation were released. To compare, the Fukushima disaster was 10 to 15 million curie, and the Chernobyl disaster was around 50 million. So more than Fukushima in theory, but only around 2 million curie were spread around. Not great, not terrible, definitely not ideal. To be fair, Kyshtym itself was spared most of the fallout due to favorable winds, blowing the radioactive ash into a different direction. Still, it did not help with the ecological situation. There was a cover-up of what happened at Mayak by the Soviet authorities. big surprise there. And most people did not know it ever happened up until around 1980s. There was also a massive resettling and cleaning operation to contain and remove the radioactive pollution, but the consequences of the disaster still are not fully cleaned up to this day. Here are a couple of fun facts to alleviate the existential dread creeping into your soul from probably learning for the first time about yet another close call humanity had with nuclear annihilation. My uncle, my mother's brother, worked at the Mayak plant for 40 years, 20 of those as a radio ecologist. I asked him to check this part of the script so I don't fuck it up, and I have his approval. He also encouraged me to tell you that the ecological situation around Ozyorsk is much better now, and it's one of the cleanest places in the whole Chelyabinsk region. The second fun fact is about the ever-popular Dyatlov Pass. Two of the members of the Dyatlov's group, who sadly perished in the mountains under mysterious circumstances, worked at the Mayak plant, Yuri Krivonishenko and Rustem Slobodin. And we know that Yuri definitely participated in the cleanup after the disaster of 1957. So the ecology of the place was rough, to say the least. What about the people who claim that Alyoshenka was alive at some point? Let's look at our witnesses. Here's Vyacheslav, the paramour of Tamara Prosvirina's daughter-in-law in 1996. Nice haircut. Here he is several years later.
Марон живет, глаза такие узкие, голубые, чисто инопланетянин.
Голубые глаза?
Да, голубые, именно. Врать не буду никогда. Я смотрю, Тоша сидит.
Сидит.
Сидит, да, сидит. Врать не буду, клянусь Богом. Клянусь своей покойной матери. Дело не выдано. Но потом уже рассмотрел. А он что-то живет-то. Так, он живет, весь волосатый, такой-то.
Волосатый?
Да, волосатый, именно. Врать не буду.
Here is another person who allegedly witnessed the living Alyoshenka.
Вы пришли, я так понимаю, выпили, да?
Ну, естественно.
И потом появилось это существо, да?
Почему оно было?
Оно пришло, просто вышло к вам как-то? Или...
Почему оно стояло?
By the way, she died from alcohol poisoning a couple of weeks after this interview. Honestly, among all of them, the daughter-in-law, the other Tamara, looks the most normal and does not seem to consume copious amounts of booze daily, which cannot be said about her husband, Tamara Prosvirina's son, Sergei. Here he is in 2004, sometime after finally getting out of jail. Now, I know what you are probably thinking. Hey, these are Russians! Of course they drink all the time and look like this. While stereotypes are often based in reality, rarely things are that simple in this world of ours. I ask you to consider the time period. Several years before the events of this story, the Soviet Union collapsed. What happened after depends on who you ask. For some, it was the worst geopolitical catastrophe in the history of Russia, the fall of an empire. For others, it was a short breath of freedom before another dictatorship took over the country. What it definitely was is chaotic. The wild 90s, лихие 90-е, in Russia were a horrible time of gangs shooting each other on the streets, political instability, economic collapse, and many other unfortunate things. Most importantly, all of the promises that were made by the Soviet state to its people, who were forced to depend on the state for everything, were broken. State-owned factories, plants and enterprises were either suddenly shut down altogether or unable to pay salaries to the employees. Even though I was little at the time, I still remember seeing news about yet another group of miners striking because they weren't paid for many months. The jobs, especially those that paid a living wage, were hard to find. People in the cities could hustle, having no choice but to quickly learn this new capitalist way of life. For example, my family lived in Moscow at the time, and my dad would travel to China by train to buy cheap goods there, mostly clothes, which he would bring back to Russia to sell at one of the chaotic early 90s markets in the city. The people of small towns and villages, though, did not have even this ethereal opportunity to make ends meet. And so many of them decided, consciously or not, to enter the soothing embrace of oblivion by drinking anything and everything that had any alcohol in it. And a little bit later, hard drugs entered the scene and decimated the Russian populace. Google crocodile, except, don't if you are at all squeamish, and the images of people rotting alive is not something you want to add to the collection of existential horrors in your mind. I'm telling you all this to give you some context before you jump to conclusions about the people you just saw. There might be a tragic story to them, but then again, maybe they were just shitty drunks and awful people. It's not like there is a shortage of those in Russia. Why are we talking about all of this, you might be thinking? Isn't this video about aliens? Sure, check out this alien. Kinda looks like Alyoshenka, does it not? This tiny skeleton was found in the Atacama Desert in Chile, and in its case the DNA test was performed. This is a prematurely born, deformed, riddled with genetic mutations, but very human fetus. The same was said by the Kyshtym gynecologists about Alyoshenka, even without the DNA test. I omitted this crucial detail for the sake of the narrative. From the beginning, many people were saying that the alien mummy was for sure just a mutated human fetus. I will not subject you to the dozens of deformed babies preserved in jars I had to look at while researching. I would really like to remove them from my memory, where they now exist between cartel chainsaw execution videos and 2 girls 1 cup. Considering the level of pollution, radiation, and rampant alcoholism in the region, it is very easy to imagine a desperate schoolgirl or a vodka-soaked woman giving birth to a disfigured child in the forest or in the graveyard, depending on which of Tamara's stories were true. Yet, even in this case, some mystery remains. Any medical professional who looked at Alyoshenka said that it is absolutely impossible for a child with this amount of genetic mutations to live without serious medical help for even a couple of minutes, let alone several weeks while being fed candies and water. Maybe Alyoshenka was a medical miracle. Well, rather, a medical nightmare. But then again, there is zero evidence he was ever alive. Just the words of a poor schizophrenic woman and some drunks. In 2019, the newspaper Komsomolskaya Pravda managed to track down the current leader of the Zolotov cult, Galina Semenkova, who took the reins after Boris Zolotov died in 2015. She was also one of the people who came to Kyshtym to take away Alyoshenka's remains. After being hounded by the newspaper for several months, Galina finally relented and said that she right away gave the corpse to her friend, a coroner from Yekaterinburg, who performed some tests and concluded that Alyoshenka was definitely a human fetus, and then disposed of the remains like any other biological material. What an inglorious end would that be? But maybe she's lying, that's her job anyways. While the Americans hog all of the UFOs, cryptids and conspiracy theories like the greedy Yankees they are, the story of Alyoshenka lives on in Russia as our own cool alien encounter. There is a movie based on the events that came out in 2007, a little yearly get-together called Alyoshenka Fest, an indie comic book I really want to get my hands on, and even a couple of statues of the extraterrestrial creature.
Прибыл он к нам, славный город.
While reality is often bleak and depressing, in the end it is up to you what to believe. Perhaps Alyoshenka was indeed an alien being that just chose a very poor time and place to make contact with humanity. Or perhaps not. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. I would really appreciate it if you subscribed, left a comment and a like. More content to come very soon. До свидания.